Hey y'all, hope everybody's doing well in this kind of strange transition to the new normal. Thought I'd check in here and try to give you guys a little bit of a best practice workflow, starting with some remedial skills that we really need to have under our belt by now. Once you get these skills down and practiced and really understand the logic behind them, things tend to fall into place really quickly. Image making becomes fast, becomes fun, becomes easy. So it all starts in Photoshop with our friend, the rubber ducky, and the selection tools, remember from the very first day or so. So I'm going to try to, let's see if I can pull this out a little bit. Don't need to make me much bigger, but that's good. Go through them really quickly. The first one's, well, the first tool at the very top of the toolbar is the move tool. I don't know why it keeps bringing up that hand tool. I'm in the PC and not a Mac, so bear with me here. Those tools straight below it's the primitive shapes. Single pixel, 1 pixel wide, either horizontal or vertical for those tools. Don't use those a lot. These tools are bread and butter tools. Rectangle tool and the elliptical tool or circle tool. If you select those tools and don't hold down a key, it draws a perfect proportion, or square in this case. If you hold down the shift key, at least in the newer versions of Photoshop, it will draw a rectangle with not proportional sides. I held my shift key. It also added to the selection path. As you can see, shift adds to a selection path. Option subtracts, or alt on the PC. Command D or Control D deselects, which I'm hitting right now. Also, the next one on there is our bread and butter program, the Lasso Tool. You simply just draw around it. I'll just draw around to these lips, or not going to kill myself. And as you'll notice, if I zoom in with the magnifying glass here, didn't do such a good job. So if I go back with that same tool and I hold my shift key, I can add to the selection. If I hold my alt or option key, I can subtract from that selection. And I can just kind of tweak to my heart's delight and kind of go back and forth. Option subtracts, that works with every single selection tool. So typically you go back and forth between a lot of different selection tools, kind of finalizing your selection path. I'm holding my shift key down now, the same tool. Again, none of these are the best tool anyways. So I have one layer over here, and I have the beak selected, so I can do whatever I want. If I go over to the move tool and grab it and pull it over, I've moved those pixels. And as you can see from the little thumbnail on the layers palette, I've actually destroyed that layer. So I'm going to Command Z or Control Z on the PC, put it right back. I do that a lot of times. I'll take chances and then put it right back with just Control Z or Command Z. But I can do other things. I can go up to Image and I can go to Adjustments, and I can do things like, there are a lot of ways to colorize an image. I like hue saturation. So if I go over to that and hit the little colorize button, I can kind of play with that. Again, my selection is not so good right there. I'll cancel that. Now that's a hard edge selection, so if I hit delete and replace it with white, you can see it's kind of hard edged and looks pretty bad. So I'm going to Command Z, put that back, Control Z. In my case, I'm on a PC. And instead, I'm going to go up to the Select menu, and I'm going to come down to Modify, and I'm going to feather that selection after the fact. Usually with some of these selection tools, and that tool's a good example, you put a feather on it when you make the selection. Or you can make a hard edge selection, in this case, like I've already done, and then go back with the same selection tool, add a feather to it, and soften that edge up. Here I want to soften the entire edge. When I colorize it, I want that red to seep in there. So I'm going to go up to Select. We'll come back to this Select menu in a little bit. And I'll come down to Modify and Feather. And this is a low-res image, so on here, I'm just going to feather it about 12 pixels. And watch what happens in the pixels. It will kind of jump a little bit in, so you can tell it's going to fade in. If I hit the delete now and replace it with white, you can see it's a little bit softer. So I'm going to undo that, Command Z, Control Z. And instead, I'm going to go up and try to colorize it again. I'm going to go up to Image, where is it? Layer, no, I'm sorry, Image, Adjustments. And I'm going to come down to Hue Saturation, turn on the Colorize button, and now you can see it's a little more forgiving. I'll turn up my lightness and color. and hue. Anyways, I'll cancel that. So you get an idea of what that tool does. I'm going to deselect, and then I'm going to go to the next tool, Polygon Lasso Tool. Worthless tool here. Really just kind of goes back and forth and doesn't do much of anything. Do I have a railroad? Let's see, I guess not. Maybe this. Nope, that's not it. Anyways, if I had a building or something like that, I would just make a point. So one point perspective, something like a railroad track or something that's very geometric, like a building that has single points in it, would be perfect for that tool. That's so good for the duck. So the next one is the magnetic lasso tool, and I like that one. I'm going to take my magnifying glass and Option or Alt, zoom out. Now, actually, I don't usually work that way. I'm going to take that magnifying glass and zoom way in. Now I can take that magnifying glass and Option or Alt click for a long time before I get back to that main page, what I really want to see, or I can just double click the hand tool. And that's my habit and my workflow. I take the magnifying glass, I zoom into whatever I'm working in Illustrator or Photoshop, and I double click my hand tool, and I'm back to where I need to be. Anyways, I'll deselect. Always Command D, Control D. Or if you have a selection, you can just click outside that selection path and that will deselect as well. Deselecting being a very important term in digital imaging. Going down the laundry list here, the magnetic lasso tool is great. You just run it along that edge. It looks for an edge that it assumes is a different color than the edge you're working with, and it will make a selection. Sometimes it guesses incorrectly, and sometimes it's a little bit off. Here and here you can see. And I can go back and add to it. Usually you hold your Shift key down, and you could do that here too. But with that particular key, oops, I lied to you. I'm going to undo that. Undo. Oh, shoot. Let's try that again. I'm going to run it around it. And when I try to get a selection with a tool like this and this much contrast, because normally most pictures aren't like that, I don't really worry about it too much. I get it close. It's pretty rough and not good. And then I'll hold my Shift key down with that same tool and go over here and grab that as well. Oops, it should have been an Option. I wanted to subtract from that, so Alt or Option. Shift over here to add to this. Option, might as well grab that little piece there, Alt or Option. And again, most of the time it's not that easy because these colors aren't so drastically different. So Shift, add on here, just using the same tool. But I don't have to. I can use that Shift with any tool. I'll clean up over here with a different tool. I'll go to use the Lasso tool, for instance. And I'll Alt, subtract from that little part, or Option, subtract. So that Option, subtract, Shift, add, works with all of the selection tools. And that's not a bad selection there. So I'm going to go to the next one on the list. And these ones are this is a brand new one with just the most recent version of Photoshop. It might not be in the labs yet, but I really like it. And yeah, as you know from class, that this quick selection tool is one of my favorites now. It's my tool du jour for selecting, at least to get started. So I'm going to deselect, Command D, or Control D in my case. And I'll start with the quick selection tool. You just paint, and bam, it's selected. You can see from the marching ants, that's what they call the selection pass. And you can see also it got confused where it hit that really hard contrast. It didn't think that was part of the selection I wanted. And in fact, it is. So I hold my Shift key down, same tool, and just sweep over it and select that as well. And so now I have the marching ants all around that selection telling me that's selected, which I can affect. I can move it. I can do anything I want to it. I can distort it. Anyways, again, getting back to this idea of first mastering the selection tools. So deselect, or with any selection tool, just clicking outside to deselect. And then the next tool down is the magic wand tool. And it works by just clicking anywhere that there's a color, and it reaches out and tries to find colors that are different. And when it hits that color that's different, it's going to assume it's an edge, sometimes incorrectly. For instance, here, this yellow is different than there. So if I click with that tool in here, it's not going to know to go there. Now we can do little things like we can go up to the Select menu. Again, we'll come back later. We went to Modify and put a feather on there a little while ago. Up here, we can go to Grow or Similar. I'll try similar at first with my fingers close to Command Z. So I got the rest of those yellows. And then I'll go to the select menu and then go to grow. And now it's growing. Now, of course, I could do the same thing by using that same tool, magic wand tool, and just holding my shift key down and just continuing to click until it picks up on all those things. And if it's really struggling, you'll want to adjust the tolerance setting up in here. It's not on all the selection tools, but what that is how tolerant it is of other pixels. So the higher the number, the more tolerant it is, the more it's going to resist these changes. So if you're struggling and you want to take less time, I'll deselect just as an example here, Command D, deselect. And with that same tool, instead of the default 32 pixels, I'll make it down to 10 or maybe 12 pixels, tab that over. And now if I click, oh, I went the other way, didn't I? I wanted to go higher. Let's go to like 140 pixels and then try that. Yeah, see, it got almost all of it. It even got the most of the red too. So the tolerance setting can be adjusted for depending on what you're trying to select. Now, usually I leave it on the default with an image like this, and this is what we did in class. And I just select the background. Although I really want to, which you can see from the marching ants, I just clicked once on that white with that tool and it selected the whole thing. Didn't have to work too hard at that. Everything's white or not. At that point, remember that's the background. So if I do anything, it's going to affect the background. I want to affect the foreground. So many times it's more advantageous to select your background and then inverse the selection. That's under the select menu, inverse. Not the same thing as image adjustments invert that will change values to from white to dark, for instance, Command Z. Select menu inverse, then the marching ants go from the background to the foreground. And here you can see that I'm now got the duck selected with the marching ants all around it. Now a brand new tool in that same thing is with the newest version of Photoshop is this object selection tool. I really like that. I'm going to Control D, deselect. And if I go over here and just draw a marquee around something that's got pretty much a lot of contrast, doesn't have to have a lot of contrast. This green screen behind me is just, got all kinds of bad light on it. It's amazing what artificial intelligence can do right now. By the way, you notice it just selected the duck. So it's kind of like the magic wand tool. If you just, instead of clicking once, you drag a marquee around it. And what I suspect it does, even in really tricky situations like a flower or something like that that's got a bunch of green and browns behind it, it isolates the single object, edge of that object that you're trying to isolate, which is fantastic. So that's a brand new one. I discovered that just this afternoon. When I put my heads up display, it keeps saying hand tool. So this PC version I've got is not accurate. You got your crop tool there and some other tools below that are equally as important, and we've talked about those before, but the selection tools are the most important. And I really want to talk about selection right now. Later on, I'll talk about another tutorial about how to use selection paths creatively, where you can save a selection. And then actually really just quickly, I'll talk about that now. So if I go over here and select that background, for instance, and we already know with that magic wand tool in one click, bang, the whole background selected. We've got our layers palette and we're active in that layers palette. Right next to it in my view, and I'm looking at under view, or rather window and workspace. Under window, I'm in essentials, default. And if you're not like mine, you can reset your essentials right here, I think, at least on a PC, but I'm in essentials. That way we're both on the same page and have the same menus. Anyways, right next to mine is called channels. And over here in channels, you can see you have your RGB information. RGB is red, green, blue. So if you separate those into small individual tracks there, you see the red, and then you see the green, and then you see the blue. And then as artists that have taken foundations ed, you know that, boy, there's an awful lot of blue in that picture. And when I click on the RGB, there's none. Why is that? Because RGB is a subtractive method. And that's a really strange thing for artists and to get their heads wrapped around. You don't add yellow and blue to get green. You actually add the opposite colors to get green. So it's a strange sort of phenomenon. Now, if we take those channels that are now RGB, and we go up to image, and then right above adjustments where we went to hue, saturation, and colorized is mode, and there's your color modes. And we're in RGB. Now, if we go to CMYK, and that's easy for artists to really kind of understand because that's red, yellow, blue, the primary colors, and then black. And if we click on that, and it's going to warn me that I'm getting ready to change them, and that's okay. Now we've got another thing that happened in our channels. We've got CMYK, and we've got the cyan, just the blue. That's starting to make sense because I don't see much blue in that image. If I go to the magenta, that's the red. Oh, that makes sense too. And if I go to the yellow, oh, that makes sense too. The darkest color would be the yellow. There's the yellow. And then the black just gives it a little bit of punch. Sometimes you'll print silk screens with just red, yellow, blue, and then not even print the black as a key plate on top. But actually, you could separate these into silk screens, for instance, or lithographs or other types of prints, and then print those on a poster. That would be your 100% red. That would be your 100% yellow. This would be your 100% blue, and just the tiniest little bit of black. And what you would get back is the CMYK image. So at any rate, that's what channels are used for, is to, at first, to store color information. They're also used to store selection paths. So, and I'm going to revert this back to RGB. And rather than just going to the image and mode and then just yanking it back to RGB, I'm going to go over to File and revert to saved. And it'll just put me back to where I was, RGB. It's not a really good idea to just take an image and just yank the pixels around and make them RGB and then CMYK, etc. So just revert to saved, and now I'm back to where the original image I had. Not that it matters, I'm not printing this, but still, good work, best practice. Anyways, the other thing that channels are used for is selection paths. So if I take that magic wand tool and click once, I've got that background selected, right? And we know if I go up to the select menu and inverse it, now I've got the foreground image selected. And under that same select menu, if I go over there and come all the way down to the bottom, I've got this thing that says save selection. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to save my selection. As I do that, look over here at this these channels. Watch what happens when I do that. So I'm going to go over here and save selection. It's going to ask me to give it a name. I'm going to not give it a name. I'm going to be lazy like normal and let it give it the default name. So if I click OK, there should be a new channel with the eyeball turned off. And as you can see from the little thumbnail, everything that's black is not selected. Everything that's white is selected. So if I deselect, go over here and deselect, I can load that selection up. And under the select menu, after I've saved a selection, and this will stay with your file, so if you hit save and you're saving it as a TIFF and you come back after dinner, that selection will still be there. So this is an easy selection. Most selections aren't that easy. They're really difficult. So if I go up to the select menu and come down, I don't have anything selected, so save selection isn't available. But right above it, we have load selection, which wasn't available before because I hadn't saved a selection. I'm going to go to load selection, and then it's going to ask me what I want to load, which channel I want to load. There it is. I was lazy. It's called Alpha 1 by default. So I'll click OK and see how it got it loaded. Now we're going to use these selection paths creatively in another tutorial. I want to continue with this whole idea of selections and how to make them, but they're critical to really making things happen really, really quickly. Working right now. Sorry. Yeah, I am. Okay, sorry. Sorry, a little interruption. Let's see here. So the ducky, you know, that's an easy thing to do. What about an image like, see if I've got one in here. Oh yeah, remember these ones? The flowers, we talked about that before. How would you select the flowers? Now we could do that with some of the things we just talked about. I could go over here and take this little magic wand tool, select a little bit of that poppy, and then go up to the select menu and go to similar. Now I've got most of that stuff, right? And then I could go up to the select menu and go to grow, because there's not much red anywhere but those flowers. And again, then go up to the select menu and continue to grow, my fingers being right next to Command Z. Looking pretty good. I didn't get any of those, did we? So if I hold my shift key down and add a little bit of that red up in there, I didn't get that one. But if I go up to select and similar, it's going to grab it for me. Looking pretty good. My little trick is, I go back to layers, by the way. We're still in channels. I'm going to go back to layers. Very different. Layers are your actual images. Channels are really just black and white, small resolution representations of each individual channel's RGB, in this case, color information. So we'll go back to layers. We work in layers traditionally. And I'll do this a lot of times. I'll just hit the delete. and it's going to ask me to replace it with something. We've done that. We've got our typical content-aware pattern and such, but I'm going to replace it with white. And I'll hide my marching ants by hitting Command H or Control H for me. And not too bad. Looks like I got most of it. So I'll Control H or Control Z or Command Z, put it right back, still in one layer. And now I can do whatever I want in this case because those are selected. So it didn't take me a lot of time to select those. If I go up to, by the way, Command H, show me that they're still visible. I do that a lot of times. I'll Command H, hide my marching ants, forget they're there, and I can't really do anything because I have a small selection off to the right. So whenever you hide them, it's a really good thing to remember. I never do, to make them visible right after that. So we'll do that same trick. Now we've done this at least 3 times, so this should be clear. Image and then adjustments, and we're going to go to hue saturation and the little colorize button. And then lightness really affects it, as does saturation and hue. Hues, of course, is self-explanatory. And then good time to Command H, hide those annoying marching ants, and looking pretty good. So cancel that. It didn't like my whatever I put in there. So that's how that works. Another way to do it, and the other way we did it, is under the select menu. So if I've got my background here and or my image selected in my layer, and I go to the select menu and I come down to color range, this is another way to select lots of things of the same color. Wow, look at that. It's sort of already selected it for me. Is because I have my marching ants already hidden. That's what I thought. I hit Command H and brought them back again. Okay, well, good enough. Let's Command D, get rid of those marching ants, cancel that. And then Command D, deselect, and then try that again. Under select, and then come down to color range. Just doing it again. So did I not deselect? I thought I did. Anyways, I'm going to select the red. And every time I do this, by the way, it's changing, right? Because over here I have sample. You can hold the shift key down, or you can click on, if you get tired of holding that shift key down, you can hit this little plus button over here, and that'll just let you add to it without having to hit shift. Or like I said, I'm just in the habit of holding the shift key down. I am trigger happy on the keyboard. And that's a different color red up in there, so I'm going to kind of grab some of that, especially up in here. And then again, if I go, whoa, I did that wrong, right? Command Z puts it right back. So just a real quick Command Z, always fingers next to Command Z, baby steps backwards. That's looking pretty good. I don't know what's happening over there. Pull this out of the way. And then shift, add some more. And I can always use that similar under the select menu. I can always use, you know, some of the similar or grow later on if I need to kind of clean up. So I click OK. Looks pretty good. I would use my trick of backspace, replace it with white. Command H, hide my marching ants. Sure enough, I'm missing some stuff in here, some little details and highlights and things where it was confused. Command Z, put it back. Command H, remind myself that I have them selected. And then let's go to select and then similar and select and grow, because those reds are really isolated. And now let's try that same trick of, you know, just deleting it for a split second, seeing what's up. Command H, looking pretty good. Command Z, put them back. Command H, don't forget to put the hidden marching ants back so you'll remember that you have them. You'll forget like me, and then you'll try to work and you won't be able to. Happens all the time. Anyways, let's see here. Oh, you know, the other thing we played with, I think, was, let's see here. It was something like, I think it was an image. It was either this one or was something like it. So, so what happens when you want to do a real pesky image, you know, something that's not quite as easy as the rubber ducky, for instance. So maybe an image like this. You know, there's transparencies. I think the one we used was a girl's hair blowing in the wind, I think, in class critique. But the dandelion. And isn't nature kind of the definition of design? I mean, the repetition that you find in nature, it's sort of everywhere. And my own personal theory is why we respond to the rules of design to begin with. But if we go back to this dandelion, for instance, and how to cut that out, we'll start with just sort of a rudimentary selection. And this object selection tool is kind of interesting. I like it. It's a good place to start. I used to use the one right below it, Quick Selection Tool. And if you haven't got the recent version of Photoshop over here, then you won't see this Quick Selection Tool here, Object Selection Tool, I should say. But the way the Object Selection Tool works, I'm going to double click my hand tool to zoom out, is we just select it and we draw a rectangle around what we're trying to select. And it does a really good job of finding an edge. Not too bad. Much better than I probably could have done with the, Quick Selection Tool. So once you've done that, we go up to our Select and Mask button that should be visible in your contextual menu bar at the top. If you don't see it here, it's because of your workspace. I'm working in Essentials right now. But if you don't see the Select and Mask button right in here, then it's going to be under the Select menu. And then we click on that. We're going to come down to Select and Mask, and that's where you'll find it. And both places will get you there. And what it does is it launches the Select and Mask filter. And move my picture out of the way here. It started at the very top. I just happened to be viewing this by looking at the mask itself. We start at the top of what your view options are at the very top. And I toggle back and forth between all of these. But we go up to Onion Skin. Onion Skin's kind of self-explanatory. It's showing us what a little bit of that image looks like below it. And if I go over here, I can pull that transparency down and see the original image completely. And that's true with all these views. You can kind of go back and see what you're missing, all these little pieces up in here, etc. So if I go to the next one, I rarely use that. I don't particularly care for those grid patterns. Marching ants does no good for me at all, so I don't use that at all. Overlay, it starts with the red, but you can choose that color. Whatever color you want would be. Sometimes your image you're cutting out's red, so you wouldn't want to use that color. And then the same thing on all of these tools. You can pull this down so you can kind of see what you're missing, and you usually go back and forth with that slider to kind of see what you've missed. If you pull up to 100%, that's what it's going to look like if we cut and pasted it. Pretty rough. And again, if we toggle back down again, here's what it looks like on black. And that's usually what I start with, something like that, or on white. A lot of times I'll take a look and see what it looks like on white. I'll go back and forth towards the end and take a look at the mask itself. And then if you have layers below it in my layers palette, I don't. But if you did, and it would show those ones below it. I think I'll start up here with overlay and leave it at red and kind of pull it into here. And if we take a look at our tool palette over here, I'm going to go back to semi-full screen. The very first one is the Quick Selection Tool, and that works exactly like the Quick Selection Tool in Photoshop or in Photoshop at my tool du jour. This is kind of an interesting thing. Select subject. I'm going to have my fingers next to Command Z and try that. That's fairly new in the Select and Mask filter. So let's just see what it does if I click on that. It says this will discard your current selection. Do you want to continue? Sure. Let's see what it does. I bet it does the same sort of thing it did before. So it got a little bit more of those things, and it got too much of that stuff over there. So let's see if I can, go up to Command Z and undo that, or Control Z for my PC. Sure enough, I've kind of put it back to where it was. So I usually don't start with the Quick Selection Tool. I've already got a quick selection. So what I start with is the Refine Edge brush. And I select that, and instead I go over here and get a little bit of this green and start working my way in. And sometimes I'll do this with a much bigger brush too. Not looking too bad there. If I increase my opacity, you can kind of see the original image on that, viewing on a overlay here of red, and what it's going to look like when I'm finished. So again, I start out in here telling Photoshop that that's the background I'm trying to get rid of. And I come in here and start to paint some of this stuff. I don't want to go in too far because some of that stuff needs to be opaque. That's white. And sometimes you'll confuse the program and it'll start to paint that out too, like it's starting to do down here now. Now, just to save time, I'm going to increase my brush size. It is a brush. So anytime you want to do that, anything that looks like a brush in Photoshop is a brush, and they have a contextual menu up here that's very similar. So I'm going to increase my size. And I'm going to go ahead and start to paint some of this other stuff out too. Try to get that green out as much as possible. I find this amazing. Again, there's nothing transparent in there. There's a little bit of green, so I'll try to take that out, but that I probably just erased some of that and made it transparent. I don't want to do that. Same thing down here. That's a good selection. It's always pesky stuff like hair or dandelions. Now let's see what happens up in here when I try to paint that back out again. Tricky. Not all of it's there, but that's okay. It's getting there. Getting a little artifacting over here. Now, you know what the quick selection tool does is it makes quick selections. And the neat thing about the quick selection tool here in this program is you can, that's the one up here, is you can hold your Option key or Alt key down and it actually subtracts from that selection instead of adds to it. So I'm going to try that up in here. I'm going to hold my Alt key down or my piece on a PC and try to clean up some of those other areas that look like they're getting some artifacting up in there. Not too bad. Now I'm going to pull that all the way up to a red and see what it looks like. Looks pretty good. And as I scroll down, we've got Smart Radius. Sometimes I'll turn that on, and there's better tutorials than I can teach you right here, right now to tell you what that explains, to you what that does. But if I pull that up, I kind of just take a look at it and see if it's improving it. And for me, it wasn't, so I'll take it and turn it off. Smooth, you know, the best way to show you what smooth does is just to go over here to the actual mask itself and kind of zoom in. So I'm going to take my magnifying glass and kind of zoom in tight. I'll go nuts on these and then put them back. So smooth just sort of smooths out that selection. Pull that back. Feather makes it a little bit blurry. Contrast increases the contrast between the black and white pixels. And then I'll leave it there for just a second. And then Shift Edge either pulls the edge in or pushes it out. And I'll take that and tab that over to 0. And then I'll come back over here and set these back to 0 as well. You know, again, that selection looks pretty good. It's usually a matter of, it's an art form unto itself. A lot of times people do the body differently than the hair or pesky areas that are like the hair, and do those separately, and then just worry about the hair and mask everything out but the hair. As we scroll down, remember these views, we just sort of toggle back and forth between them to see what it looks like. That's red, that's what it looks like on black, and maybe a little bit of that green behind there still in there. And for that reason, if I scroll down, and it's hidden sometimes, this output settings down in here, you got to take a look. And even then, sometimes, depending on your workspace, it might be hidden in the window, but you turn that down, you've got other options. One of them is decontaminate colors. So while I'm zoomed in, I'm just going to turn that on, and it looks a lot better. It's usually used for green screens, and coincidentally, I've got a green screen. Looks like I got a little bit of green up in there. Fingers right next to Command Z. I'm going to go up in here and try to paint that out. I've already told it it's green, so let's see what it does. Not bad. Over here too. Not bad. Okay, it's looking pretty good. Double click my hand tool, doesn't work. Oh, it does work. I'm back into the outside. Looking really good. Not bad mask at all. So if I look down at the bottom, it says, my default here says, if you look down in here for my options, it says new layer with layer mask, and 9 times out of 10, that's what you want. It may not be your default. If you click on here, you can get a selection, output to a selection, output to a layer mask, up to a new layer, in which case it's destructive. It'll take the backgrounds out. New layer with layer mask, and again, 99 times out of 100, that's what you want. A new document or a new document with layer mask. Again, usually you want that. So if I click OK, you can see that it took the background out and masked that out for me pretty well. It's hard to tell because I've got that transparency background there again. So if I go get something like sunset real quick, Command C, copy, and then go back to my dandelion, and it's always going to paste wherever active, right above whatever layer you have active. So over here, I'll just select that layer and then Command V, paste it so it's on top. And that's not big enough, so I'm going to do something you should never do, is I'm going to Command T, that's T for free transform, grab some handles, and on the newer versions of Photoshop, you do not hold the Shift key down to constrain proportions. On the older versions, you do. And here, not looking too bad. So that's how you select and mask. And again, better tutorials out there than the one I just showed you. But you really want to learn all the selection tools. And this really allows you to get some finesse in your imagery.